Roger Federer just did something nobody expected. A private jet, a surprise invitation, and a moment that left the entire tennis world talking. What started as a normal week turned into something no one could have predicted. This isn't about luxury or celebrity. It's about respect, mentorship, and a gesture that says everything about how legends can support the next generation. But why her? Why now? And what does it mean for the future of women's tennis? Alex Eala's name wasn't always part of the conversation. For years she was just the girl from Manila who dreamed bigger than her situation allowed. Born into a family that loved tennis but didn't have the money or connections that European and American players often start with, she had to fight for everything. Her parents made sacrifices most people never have to consider. Moving, finding sponsors, believing in a dream when almost nothing was working in their favor. By 14, Eala was training at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain. That alone meant something. Not many young Asian players ever get that kind of access or that level of coaching. But she was not there just to take part. She was there to compete at the highest level she could reach. In 2020, she became the first Filipino player to win a Grand Slam singles title at the junior level, taking the Australian Open Girls Singles Championship. Back home in the Philippines, the reaction was enormous. The country had found its tennis hero. But junior success does not guarantee anything at the professional level. Eala knew that. The jump from junior tennis to the WTA Tour is brutal. You go from being the standout prospect to just another player fighting for ranking points, sponsorships, and a foothold in a sport that does not wait for anyone. Her early professional years were hard. ITF tournaments, WTA qualifiers, injuries, and the slow, painful lesson that talent alone is never enough. She kept going anyway. By 2023, she had broken into the top 200. By 2024, she was pushing toward the top 150. Her serve was sharper. Her baseline game more confident. Her mental toughness more reliable. But she was still looking for that one moment, that tournament or connection that would push her from promising player to real contender. What she did not know was that someone had been watching her very closely. Someone who understood the pressure of high expectations, the loneliness of the grind, and how much the right support at the right time can change everything. Someone whose career was built not just on winning, but on doing things the right way. Roger Federer. Federer's retirement in 2022 ended an era in tennis, but it did not end his influence. He has always been the kind of champion who looks beyond his own legacy. He has mentored young players, invested in tennis development programs, and quietly backed athletes who remind him of where he once was. Hungry, talented, and deserving of a real chance. Eala fit that description perfectly. A player from an underrepresented part of the world, grinding her way up without the support systems or funding that others take for granted. Federer saw something in her that most people had not fully recognized yet. And he decided to act on it. What he did next nobody saw coming. Not Eala. Not her team. Not the WTA. Federer has never been the loudest voice in tennis. His influence does not come from social media or controversial press conferences. Comes from action. From showing up. From using what he has built to give others a lift. Over the years he has supported young talent in ways that rarely make headlines. He has funded development programs in Africa, offered guidance to players like Dominic Thiem and Gregor Dimitrov, and built genuine relationships with athletes who needed direction more than they needed attention. But what Federer did for Alex Eala went further than anything he had done before. Here's a cleaner, simpler rewrite. Federer has always been selective with his mentorship. He does not hand out advice freely. He looks for players with the right mix of talent, work ethic, and humility. Players who remind him of his own journey. The struggles, the self-doubt, the moments where everything could have gone sideways if not for someone choosing to believe in them. In early 2025, quiet rumors started moving through tennis circles. Federer had been spotted at several WTA events, not just watching matches but meeting with players behind the scenes. He was asking questions, sitting in on training sessions, taking notes. Some thought he was building his own academy. Others assumed he was just staying close to the sport. But a few people who knew more believed something more specific was happening. And one name kept coming up in those conversations. Alex Federer had apparently been following Eala's career for over a year. He had watched her junior success, her difficult transition to the professional game, and her refusal to stop pushing even when the results did not reflect how good she actually was. He saw in her the same drive he once had, the same need to prove people wrong. But he also saw something beyond her tennis. He saw a player who represented an entire region that had never had its moment in this sport. Federer has spoken many times about wanting tennis to grow beyond its traditional centers in Europe and America. He has talked about Asia, Africa, and South America. About the millions of young athletes in those places who love the game but rarely see themselves reflected at the top of it. Eala, as the leading Filipino player and one of the most exciting young talents in Southeast Asia, was exactly the kind of person that vision needed. Supporting her was not just about one player's career. It was about what that player could mean to an entire generation of kids watching from the other side of the world. In late January 2025, Federer contacted Eala's management team directly. The message was short but stunning. He had an opportunity he wanted to offer her. Not just a piece of advice. Not just a training session. He wanted to personally mentor her for a full week. Give her access to his network. Help her take the next real step in her career. And he wanted to do it in a way that would mean something beyond just the two of them. Eala's team was stunned. This was not a sponsorship deal or a generic brand partnership. This was Roger Federer, arguably the greatest player who ever lived, offering his time, his knowledge, and his connections to a player still grinding her way toward the top 100. Nothing like it had happened before. But the mentorship was only part of what Federer had in mind. What came next would catch the entire tennis world off guard. February 10, 2025. Alex Eala was in Dubai preparing for a WTA 250 event. It was supposed to be a normal week. Practice sessions, qualifier matches, the usual routine. She was locked in and focused, trying to make a deep run and pick up valuable ranking points. Her team had kept the Federer conversations completely private, not wanting to add pressure or break her concentration. Then the call came. Her coach pulled her aside after morning practice with an unusual message. Roger Federer wanted to meet her. Not next week. Not at a scheduled event. Right now. At the airport. Eala thought it was a joke. As far as she knew, Federer was in Switzerland. Why would he be in Dubai? And why the airport? Her coach smiled and handed her a boarding pass. Not for a commercial flight. For a private jet. Federer's private jet. The plan was straightforward but extraordinary. Federer was personally flying Eala to here's a cleaner, simpler rewrite. Switzerland. 4 days training at his academy, working with his coaching team, and talking through her career in real depth. He had arranged everything. The jet, the accommodation, the training schedule, even the meals. All Eala had to do was say yes. She stood there holding the boarding pass, unable to fully process what was happening. This was Roger Federer. The man whose poster she had on her bedroom wall as a kid. The player she studied when she was teaching herself a one-handed backhand. And now he had sent a private jet to come get her. Did not feel real. Eala later described the moment in an Instagram post. I've dreamed of meeting my heroes, but I never imagined one of them would go this far to believe in me. I don't have the words. Just gratitude and a promise to make this mean something. Within hours she was in the air, flying over the Arabian Gulf toward Europe. The jet was understated but comfortable. Exactly what you would expect from Federer, a man who has always been about class over flash. Eala spent the flight texting her family and calling her parents, trying to explain what was happening even though she could barely believe it herself. When the plane landed in Zurich, Federer was there waiting. Not just his team. Federer himself. He greeted her with a smile and 3 words. Let's get to work. The images that came out over the next few days were something else entirely. Eala and Federer on the practice court working on serve placement. Federer demonstrating footwork while she watched closely. The two of them sitting courtside in deep conversation, surrounded by some of the best coaches in the sport. It was not a photo opportunity. It was real mentorship, real investment. Real belief in another person's potential. The tennis world had never seen anything quite like it. And the reactions came fast. Tennis is not a sport that gets surprised often. It runs on routines, schedules, and familiar storylines. But when word got out that Roger Federer had flown Alex Eala to Switzerland on his private jet for a personal mentorship program, social media could not contain itself. Coco Gauff was one of the first to respond. "This is what legends do," she wrote. "Not just win titles but lift up the next generation. Respect Roger and congrats Alex. You deserve this." Aryna Sabalenka posted a photo of Federer and Eala on the practice court with the caption, "When the GOAT believes in you, you better believe in yourself." Big things coming for Alex. Even Serena Williams, who rarely comments publicly on WTA news, quietly liked several posts celebrating the moment. A small gesture but a meaningful one. Not everyone was simply celebratory though. Some raised honest questions. Why Eala specifically? There are plenty of players struggling without support. Was this genuine mentorship? Or was Federer building his profile in the women's game in a way that also served his own interests? One anonymous WTA coach told Tennis Insider, "It's a beautiful gesture, but let's not pretend this doesn't come with pressure. Alex is now under a microscope. If she doesn't perform, people will question whether she deserved this at all. That's a lot to carry." In the Philippines, the reaction was pure joy. Social media flooded with hashtags like #LabanAyala. Here's a cleaner, simpler rewrite. The hashtags #LabanAyala and #FedererBelieves in Alex spread across Filipino social media within hours. Local news channels ran full features on her journey and what Federer's support could mean for tennis in Southeast Asia. The Philippine Sports Commission released a statement praising Federer for recognizing her potential and bringing attention to Filipino athletes. But the most emotional reaction came from her parents. Her father, in a tearful interview with a Manila sports channel, said simply, "We've sacrificed everything for Alex's dream. Seeing someone like Roger Federer believe in her the way we do, it's beyond words." Validation. Hope. The WTA released a carefully worded statement acknowledging Federer's contribution to the sport. But behind closed doors there were harder conversations happening. Some officials pointed out that if rising players had to depend on the personal generosity of retired legends just to access elite coaching and resources, that said something troubling about the system itself. The goodwill was real, but so was the gap it exposed. Still, the overall feeling was clear. This was a genuinely inspiring moment. Federer had done something that went beyond rankings and results. He had reminded the tennis world that greatness is not only measured in trophies. It is measured in the impact you have on others. But here is the real question. What does this actually mean for Alex Eala's career? And for tennis as a whole? Take away the private jet and the headlines and what remains is something much more significant. Federer did not just give Eala a trip to Switzerland. He gave her legitimacy. He gave her access. He gave her belief at a moment when the sport had not yet fully given her any of those things. In professional tennis, access is everything. Talent matters, but so does who coaches you, who trains alongside you, and who opens doors when you need it most. Players from traditional tennis powerhouses like the United States, France, and Spain grow up with built-in networks. They train at elite academies, compete in juniors alongside future top 10 players, and attract major sponsors early. Players like Eala do not have that. She built her own path through scholarships, small sponsorships, and her family's sacrifice. Reaching the top 150 was a huge achievement. But getting to the top 50 requires a different kind of support entirely, the kind most players outside the traditional tennis world simply cannot access. Federer just handed her that. The 4 days in Switzerland were not just about hitting balls. She worked with biomechanics specialists who have trained Grand Slam champions. She sat in on strategy sessions with coaches who have spent decades at the highest level of the sport. She trained with players who compete at the very top. She had real conversations with Federer about mental toughness, handling pressure, and surviving the loneliness of life on tour. And now she has his endorsement. That is real currency in this sport. Sponsors will notice. Tournament directors will notice. Other players will notice. When Roger Federer invests his time and name in someone, the tennis world pays attention. But there is a bigger message underneath all of this. Federer's gesture is a quiet challenge to the sport itself. Tennis has a diversity problem. The ATP and WTA tours are still heavily dominated by players from a small number of countries. Athletes from Africa, Asia, and South America consistently struggle to break through, not because they lack ability but because they lack resources. If a retired player can do this on his own, the question becomes obvious. Why can't the governing bodies? Why can't the Grand Slams? Why can't the major sponsors? If tennis wants to be a truly global sport, it needs to invest in players like Eala, not as charity cases but as the future of the game. For Eala, the pressure is now real and significant. She is no longer just representing herself or the Philippines. She is representing every player who was ever overlooked, every kid from a country where tennis is not the obvious path, who was told quietly or loudly that they did not belong here. That is a heavy thing to carry. But if anyone has shown they can carry it, it is the girl who has been carrying it her whole life. Here's a cleaner, simpler rewrite. When asked recently how she plans to honor Federer's belief in her, Eala did not talk about rankings or titles. She said, "I want to inspire the next generation the way Roger inspired me. I want kids in the Philippines, in Southeast Asia, everywhere, to see that dreams don't have borders." That is what this is really about. Roger Federer retired from professional tennis in 2022. But his story did not end there. Changed shape. For most athletes, legacy is defined by what they did while they were competing. The titles, the records, the memorable moments. But Federer has always seen it differently. He has understood that a real legacy is about what you leave behind after the playing is done. Supporting Alex Eala is not just a kind gesture. It is a statement about what Federer believes this sport should look like. A sport that creates opportunity. A sport that recognizes talent regardless of where it comes from. Since retiring, he has worked toward exactly that. His foundation has built schools and provided education to thousands of children across Africa. He has worked with the ATP to improve pathways for young players. And now with Eala, he has shown that mentorship is not about giving advice from a distance. It is about showing up. What makes this moment stand out is that it is not transactional. Federer is not her coach. He is not a sponsor. He is not taking a percentage of anything. He simply saw potential in someone and decided to do something about it. In a sport built around contracts, endorsements, and brand strategy, that kind of straightforward generosity is genuinely rare. But it also puts an uncomfortable spotlight on everyone else. If one retired player can do this on his own, what is stopping the institutions? The WTA has programs for developing players, but they are limited. The Grand Slams generate enormous revenue, but how much of it flows toward players outside the top 100? Tennis talks often about diversity and inclusion. The question is how often those words get backed by real money and real action. Federer's support of Eala is a mirror held up to the sport. It shows what is possible when belief is followed by action. And it asks a simple but pointed question. Who's next? For Eala, the private jet was just the beginning. The real work starts now. She has to perform. She has to show that the belief placed in her was not misplaced. She has to carry the weight of expectation without being crushed by it. That is the reality of an opportunity like this. It is a gift and a test at the same time. But everything about her story so far says she is ready for both. She has spent her entire life being told the odds were against her, and she has spent her entire life proving that wrong. She has spent her entire life being underestimated, overlooked, and told she did not belong. And she has spent her entire life proving that wrong. Now, with one of the greatest players of all time in her corner, the world is watching. Not just to see if she succeeds, but to see what happens when a legend decides to show everyone what real mentorship can look like. This is no longer just about Alex Eala. It is about the future of tennis. It is about whether the sport will take seriously the example Federer is setting. It is about whether other champions will follow his lead. And it is about whether a girl from Manila can rise to this moment and inspire an entire generation of kids who never saw themselves in this sport before. So here is the real question. Was this a single generous gesture, or the beginning of something much bigger for women's tennis? Federer's private jet was never really about luxury or headlines. It was about belief. Belief in Alex Eala. Belief in what tennis could be. And belief that legends carry a responsibility to lift up the people who come after them. What happens next depends on Eala, and on whether the tennis world is willing to follow the example one retired champion just set for all of them. One thing is certain. This moment will be remembered long after the rankings have changed.